All right, everyone, welcome back after this short break for our next panel with, again, I'm saying it all the time, but it's true, really three exciting speakers that will be sharing a bunch of insights across advice for startups on how startups can work with corporates and form partnerships with corporates, but also doubling down on the investment theme. So we actually have people on the panel both covering the investment side of things as well as the partnerships, corporate partnership side of things. So really excited to have you all here today. A very quick introduction. We have Kayalin Akens-Irby. She's the head of partnerships at PlanetFWD, who is working mainly with food brands to help them have a net positive impact and a net zero impact on the climate. She's also Climate VC Fellow with Imasia, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So it's a bit of investment background and knowledge coming in there. And also one of the people behind the ClimateTech Club on Clubhouse, which will be hosting us later today for a bit of a debrief. So it's great to have you. We have Lubomila Jordanova. She's the founder and CEO of Plan A, a carbon accounting solution that's working with a range of corporates. She's also the founder of the Green Tech Alliance, basically a big community of people in this space and a great community builder. I think I've rarely met anyone previously to this conference that didn't come across your name before, which is a really good sign in terms of community building. And we have Peet, Denny, who's the founding partner of Potential Climate Ventures, a fund in the UK here investing in climate tech solutions, and they're just about to basically close the fund and invest. So you're probably, as a founder, just about the right stage to knock on Pete's doors and be like, look, as soon as you got all those checks in, give them to us. So with that, welcome to everyone. And the first half of the panel, I really want to focus a little bit further on investment, because I think all of you have a bit of perspective to share, and then shift our focus towards corporate and startup partnerships and hear your experience from that. So the first question of investment is really a meta question, is how there seems to be a lot more new money moving into the climate tech space. And I think you're part of that in different ways, or have benefited from that in different ways. But do you think there's a need for more funding in this space, and what needs to happen for that to be unlocked? Who wants to start on that?
I'm happy to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, we have seen from the Green Tech Alliance, and also I can speak from the perspective of planning, a lot of different challenges related to the funding space. There's definitely been a lot of welcomed announcements, like what happened, for example, yesterday with the World Fund. One of our good friends, Daniel, he's one of the founding partners and the initiator of the fund. They announced a 350 million fund. There's been also 2150 and many others. But what we notice when we speak to the members of the Green Tech Alliance, which is now a community of more than 1,000 green tech companies, is that still there's a lot of missing capital in the pre-seed stage, and also for hardware in particular. And it's the growth stage, so anything A plus, Series A plus. So I would say all the capital is welcome, but we need to focus on where the gaps at the moment. From a Plan A perspective, we have had the chance to have found since the beginning a lot of investors that also, even though mainstream, have trusted that what we're building is actually the new economy. So they never put us in a separate bucket where we needed to get money only from climate tech VCs and so on. And I hope that this becomes actually the way investors treat climate tech founders going further, which has not been always the usual case.
Just to build on that, we've also noticed that there's a big gap in the seed and pre-seed area, and that's where we're going to be focusing our efforts. And we found that there's a lot of appetite from LPs in helping us to invest in companies at this stage, but that appetite mainly comes from kind of individual investors, angel investors, or from family funds, or maybe very specialist institutions. But what is missing, and I find this to be the case myself, but plus also with my colleagues who I speak to from other funds, is the institutional money coming from from pension funds and so on. And I think where maybe this needs to change is that they're looking at what we're doing is perhaps a little bit weird, right? So it's longer term than they're expecting. It's maybe beyond the horizon of kind of 15 years that they're used to investing for. The metrics are not just purely economic. There's kind of a multi-dimensionality to the metrics of how we measure our own success as funds and as GPs. And I think there's something that needs to be done to help institutions of that magnitude get comfortable with the kind of risk and length of investment timescale that we're taking.
Kayalin.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I think, a friend, Sophie Purdom, had tweeted a couple of days ago when Sequoia launched the idea of the Sequoia Fund, thinking about kind of longer term investment horizons for venture capital. Like, where is the Sequoia Fund for climate tech? So definitely something that is needed, to Pete's point, in terms of understanding there's going to be kind of just longer timelines that don't necessarily fit into the standard kind of VC return profile. And on the piece around LPs, I think that there's a huge opportunity there when we think about LP action as it relates to climate. It's oftentimes in the format of mandates, in terms of ESG investment dollars being allocated to GPs that are willing to make commitments around climate as part of their ESG strategy, and LPs committing to taking their funds net zero. But there's not really a ton of support in terms of getting the GPs there, right? Or the GPs investing in the technologies that would be needed to actually facilitate that transition. So I think it's totally aligned with the strategy, if you think about it from that perspective. So the next step would be, okay, let's find the solutions that can do it. And I think they'll start to feel that need pretty quickly. I mean, we see a new LP, SFers, all these huge institutional LPs committing to net zero. So I think that need will probably be felt pretty quickly.
Pete, you just came out of fundraising, or you're pretty much kind of finalizing things on that stage. Do you feel like there was a need for a different set of LPs that you need to ask for money, or a different approach on your side to be able to pull off a new climate tech fund? Was there any kind of different type of approach that was needed?
Well, I mean, I'm a first-time fund manager, so I've got nothing to compare this with. But our deck and our approach certainly changed over the course of the year. So we've been setting up for most of this year, and doing a lot of test and learn. So in addition to meeting lots of awesome founders, we've been meeting a whole raft of different types of LPs and testing the message. In the beginning, we kind of took a revenue first, a return first kind of a message. That amazing quote from Chamath, who said the world's first trillionaire is going to be made in climate change. That was front and center in our deck. We spoke a lot about how this is a rising tide, that the returns are going to be amazing, yada yada. But we found, but that really wasn't true to the heart of what we were trying to do. What we're really trying to do is mobilize funds to make a massive impact. And and I believe in my heart of hearts that if you're going to try and save a planet, if you do save a planet, then there are going to be great returns. But it should be that way around, impact first. And so as we started to test this message, we found that I was really gratified to see that there were plenty of investors for whom this impact first message really resonates. And some people, they say 1,000 true fans is what you should really go for. Go for a message that really resonates with a smaller number of people, rather than a message which kind of is ho-hum for the majority. We found that slowly moving the kind of returns towards the back of the deck, and then eventually, into the appendix, worked really well. And so this message of, listen, we're going to try and make a massive impact. Here's what we mean by a massive impact. Here's how we measure it. Here's how we're different to what everybody else is doing. That massively resonates with plenty of people out there for the types of funds that we're trying to raise.
Maybe
Lubomila, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to build up on what Pete was saying, because I think it really resonates with the learnings that I've gotten from all the investors that we have in our network, but also as our clients. I think investors at the moment are looking for the experts that can define what actual impact means, because this is not their bread and butter. They have not been working in metrics related to longevity of certain products, or like externalities related to environmental impact. So they're looking for the people that can understand that, can define the thesis around that, and essentially combining this with their own knowledge on what really true returns from a financial perspective mean, then essentially would build like a good fund. I think also there's a big wave of corporate money flowing into the space that further really stipulates the more private money also considering the opportunity to build these kinds of funds as well.
Got it. How do you see that corporate money flowing in mainly? Is there a lot of kind of new corporate funds being set up? Obviously, there's a lot of corporates making pledges to commit to net zero or invest in climate tech, whatever that may mean. What do you see happen concretely, shifting slightly over to the corporate theme as well?
What we have been able to see quite a lot in the last few months is, first of all, a lot of panic for COP26. I think many have been essentially considering this as the deadline for their commitment to be announced, and that has led to a lot of corporate pledges being made. I think if I just add at least one sentence on the fund side of the story, there's definitely been a lot of corporates that have understood that it's not only going to be a decision for them to decide to define a corporate agenda on sustainability, but also to bank on it and to expect financial returns on that. And we have been personally as a company bombarded by a lot of companies that want to find a way into the discussion through connecting to an expert that we would consider ourselves to be. So I think there was actually a fantastic article that I would heavily recommend to everyone from FT Today that actually was mapping out all of the commitments that have been made over the last few months on pledges and all of the countries also that have made them. There have been actually, I think, 193 that have been made in terms of countries, and then set targets, and then there's another few hundred corporates that have made commitments. So if this is possible to happen within a few months, then imagine what's going to be happening after COP.
I also get the feeling that a lot of these companies, and maybe even countries like the UK, are making these pledges without necessarily knowing all of the details of how they're going to pull that off. And this is a great way of linking up with what we're doing, which is bringing all these crazy, amazing founders who they do know how to achieve, that to pull that off in all of those various ways.
Yeah, let's move to the next theme as well, Kayalin. Maybe you want to add on that before we move to the next one, focusing more on corporate. Do you have anything to add on that one? I don't want to cut you out.
I mean, I can perhaps. Well, yeah, I did want to say I think a lot of this is happening through corporate VC arms in terms of, large companies identifying technology solutions that can meet the needs of a large company. I do think that there is a ton of value in partnership and companies like being willing to work with early stage companies who our entire goal is to learn and to grow and to improve and to meet the needs of the market, right? But doing that in a silo is impossible. And so the more and more corporates are willing to work with early stage technology companies to scale, I think is extremely impactful. I think being overly prescriptive can sometimes be a detriment to progress. If corporates are kind of, identifying, it's important to identify their needs and find technologies that are going to meet them, at least have the potential to. But I think within climate tech, where some technologies that are extremely impactful are still nascent, it's important for corporates to be willing to partner to scale, which technology teams are entirely capable of doing.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Pete already mentioned, hey, we actually have the approach of, all these corporates making these bold statements, but they don't actually know how to get there. And with that, I would love to go to Lubomila as well. I'm sure that's a good starting point for you generally as well of, corporates having made bold commitments and then trying to figure out how do we even measure our climate impact, where Plan A comes in. So give us a bit of an overview of obviously how you're helping those corporates. Feel free to pitch us in 30 seconds, but the other one is more about like, what's your strategy there? What's a good strategy for a company like yours to partner with corporates and use that to your advantage? Do you do that?
So you're totally right that actually the last few years have been the golden opportunity, first of all, to educate a lot of companies on the importance of sustainability, but also to backtrack their commitments alongside the realistic possibilities for them to achieve these pledges that they've made. What has been quite often observed, especially over the last few months, has been commitments being made without necessarily utter agenda developed on actual response to decarbonization. So how do you actually reduce emissions? And obviously the reduction is only possible if you've calculated these emissions. So that's where essentially our work comes in play. For those of the audience that are not familiar with our work, what we do is we support corporates with complex data processing for carbon accounting, and then automatically we give suggestions on decarbonization and reporting. And essentially we optimize the whole ESG analysis and then reporting and improvement process. What has been quite important for us to bank on this is, first of all, education. I think at the moment, given there's a lot of discrepancy in the level of understanding of the sustainability topic, there's always the need for us to really understand what is the stage of advancement. Is the company mature in the understanding of what they really need to do? We're not the kind of company that is going to come in, calculate something, and then give you some sort of a badge that tells you you're carbon neutral. We don't believe in that because we think that there's a problem that needs to be addressed, which is actually reducing emissions. So with this in mind, we really need to be mindful of how do we engage the stakeholders within a company through our software, because it has the possibility to engage a lot of different stakeholders, to then enable them to really embed sustainability on an operational level in the way the company works, start understanding the data analysis, start understanding what action they can take, and then also be prepared for all the regulatory shift that is happening, especially in Europe. I think what's really exciting in the space, with this I finish, is the fact that this year has been a lot easier to do sales because you need to skip a lot of the explanation of why does it even matter, why is climate change an agenda for the corporate sphere. Companies get it and companies want to contribute. The only challenge that they face still is navigating all the regulatory adjustments that are happening, as well as all of the decarbonization efforts that they need to take, because it's somehow sometimes confusing to have to engage your third parties that fall within scope 3, to engage maybe your employees, which are also in scope 3, or your customers again, which are part of this peripheral level of emissions. But I'm sure we're going to be able to get there with all of the efforts that are being done by all of the participants in this event, but also on a legislative level.
Kayalin, what's your view on that? Obviously, with PlanetFWD, you're helping, especially food brands, be part of the change as well. How's your strategy to kind of start partnering with them? I also know you actually came up with your own brand to demonstrate it works. So please share with us your strategy and maybe some nuggets for founders in the audience that want to replicate that for their companies.
Yeah. 100%. So, I mean, our whole strategy and an internal motto we have at PlanetFWD is we do the hard things to make it easier for you to do the right thing. And so we are really focused on consumer brands, food and beverage first, but also personal care, apparel. We do carbon accounting, similar to Lubomila, for those companies across scope 1, 2, and 3. And then are really focused on decarbonizing the supply chain for any consumer product or consumer brand. Likely up to 90% of your emissions are actually going to be scope 3 and are going to be in your value chain across your suppliers, from the agricultural emissions that went into growing your inputs to manufacturing and so on. And so if we just stopped at measuring as Lubomila mentioned, there would be nothing achieved. And I think that's actually a really big piece when we talk about investment into climate tech in general. It's really about not only the dollars that are flowing into technology companies, but what actions they're actually facilitating from that point forward. And so PlanetFWD does the carbon accounting for consumer brands. We then also are really focused on reducing emissions through the supply chain. So we actually are building a database of sustainable suppliers, ideally those using regenerative process farming practices, upcycling, these practices that have direct emission savings potential, where you can identify a supplier that can reduce the emissions of your products and therefore of your supply chain overall. And so, over and over and over again, we can make our way to net zero, and ideally actually heal the earth through the products that we buy. But I think in general, our strategy is to give the insights, but also to facilitate the actions. And that way, we're resulting in real change and actually getting to net zero and making that all seem very tangible and kind of easy for brands to wrap their head around. Because getting back a report that says, oh my gosh, 80% of my emissions are found in my suppliers, now what? That actually might make things feel a lot harder in a lot of situations. So we're making sure that the second you find that out, you also find out what the answer is to how to make it better.
Can I ask a quick question? So I think I'm happy that the companies say, listen, we're going to do this. We're going to be net zero by, 2035 or whatever. And we don't even know what that means yet, but we're going to make a pledge and then we're going to find out and do whatever it takes. I'm happy with that approach rather than wait 2 or 3 years before they make that pledge. But I wonder, once they're doing that and they start to calculate, okay, so what's our position? How bad they discover it is, are there cases, Lubomila and Kayalin, where you're finding the companies that you're measuring their impact is actually orders of magnitude bigger? And would it be possible to kind of publish? So for this type of company in this type of industry, it's roughly on the order of X or Y.
Actually, what we've noticed with a lot of corporates is that you can't just do usual industry benchmarks, because you take a large automotive, they're never only an automotive. They're also a bank, they're also a fleet manager, they're also like so many different things that sometimes they even produce some of their little boats and little elements that are contributing to the end product. So the outlook of the CO2 emissions is just never similar or never the same as someone else within the industry. I think what we have noticed when we have these kinds of cases is that we're giving the quite quickly a good understanding of the CO2 emissions based on previous clients that we had within the same industry at like 50 to 60% accuracy. And they were like, this is where we're going to get to like a double or triple amount of CO2, or we're going to see just a small increase. But these last 40% are something that is very specific to you. And I think this is the honest approach to kick off the journey with a company. And then essentially by tapping into different data sources and so on, because we're all about automation, data collection, to start understanding really the elements that contribute to the final outlook. But I think it's still missing, and where we need to get to, based on the first point you made, Peet, is that we should hopefully post-COP shy away from making commitments that are backed by data. I think it's really scary if pledges are being made without them being based on science that is actually calculated what would be the likely achievement of net zero within a certain amount of decades. And also, as a second step, reduce the timelines, because it's really challenging to imagine how companies achieving something in 2050 if you assume that some of the board members are not even going to be involved anymore in the company. So I would say smaller pledges, but for a shorter time is what at least we encourage our clients to go for, with a lot more focus on accuracy from the beginning.
Isn't it like a New Year's pledge where you say, listen, I'm super overweight. I'm going to lose like 10 kilos within 3 months. Isn't that a good thing for companies to do? And then you figure out along the way how to do that. Or are you completely against that approach? And now I'm going to stop hogging the conversation.
Oh, no, I think it's a really good question that you're making. And I think it's not, it's incredibly important that we clarify these things. And what we always say to our clients is that sustainability is a journey. It's not something that you can define on day one and know in a similar way as if you're trekking through the mountain and this is a defined path you've been on so many times. This is something that is novel. These are also approaches that require a lot of innovation to be implemented in a company. A lot of things can mess up along the way. A lot of things can change along the way. Your company can downsize, it can increase in size. So all of these shifts have to be assumed, but also anticipated. What I encourage, though, is honesty. And this honesty is where you really focus on actually speaking about something that you find possible. And if you don't know about it, to focus on the things that you know about. Because there's ownership of at least like 40 to 50% of your emissions, even in a company that's heavily dependent on production, where you can influence really quick and effective carbon reduction. This is where we should be focusing and putting emphasis on when it comes to reduction. For the rest of it, we can focus our efforts on really being this engaging partner that is getting the suppliers, getting the employees, getting the customers to be part of this decarbonization journey, which is where the engagement, of course, falls within a different pattern because it's outside the scope of your influence.
Okay, then go ahead.
I mean, I think it's a really great question, and I'll speak. Also, my background's in ESG. I spent the last 4 years working with private equity funds to build ESG investment strategies and implement ESG programs. And so I do think that I am kind of a proponent of the meet people where they are camp in terms of being able to facilitate greater improvement today, even if it means setting interim goals. And so I think when it comes to climate action, net zero is a big goal. I totally agree with Lubomila, and for it to be so far off makes it very, very difficult for people to be held accountable today. And so I think something in the very short term, for example, with PlanetFWD, we do facilitate carbon neutrality on behalf of consumer brands. I think there's a lot of positives of that in terms of building kind of carbon literacy amongst consumers and starting to have consumers be able to hold brands accountable for their climate action. But that said, kind of a lot of carbon neutrality commitments out there don't actually include reduction, which is a problem. You should not be able to just calculate your emissions, offset them with very questionable offsets, and then call it a day. And so at PlanetFWD, we understand that brands today do want, quick wins, so to speak, and we do understand that they are familiar with the concept of carbon neutrality, and that might be something that they're interested in doing. And so we believe if that's the case, that we're going to take that and we're going to use it for good. And so achieving carbon neutrality through PlanetFWD does require year-over-year reduction efforts, and that's something that we facilitate. And it does require high-quality offsets that have been vetted by PlanetFWD. And so I think that is one way that we're working to. We work with brands on, achieving net zero and also carbon neutrality, and that's an opportunity to create change today, as opposed to getting a commitment that's not going to have action until 5 years from now. And so I think there's a lot that needs to be done on reducing climate delay 100%, and that might be a function of understanding the incentives that are out there today and leveraging those to be more impactful.
So I'm hearing some themes floating around that I'd like to double down on as well. I think one is around the need to set some really good standards, and it seems like both PlanetFWD and Plan A are doing a good job of kind of really also educating customers on like what does good actually look like. It's not enough to just offset and that's it. So I love that. And then the other one is around, I think, what we see in policy and politics as well, where we get a lot of pledges. I'm originally German. Right now there's a massive debate because we're forming a new government in Germany around, okay, great, the government has pledged all kinds of things, but the action that you see right now is very little. Do you think there's a similar issue with corporates? And then what is the message to founders in the audience in terms of helping those companies move beyond the pledges? Is it about disruption and kind of just trying to replace those companies by bringing about better solutions, or how can a partnership model look like that helps those companies take action in practical terms? Anybody wants to go on that?
Can I speak quickly about your first point? So about the I think there's maybe a mis-selling scandal coming. There's a big reputational risk for organizations who've said, listen, we're going to get to net zero. Maybe we are net zero. But then when you lift the lid on what they have actually done, it's full of very low quality offsets. I think the world at the moment is, a ton is a ton is a ton. It's all the same. But soon your public opinion is going to move on quite a bit to the extent that actually we're now interested in how you have achieved net zero. So let's have a look. This brand here, and so the companies who've been working with the likes of Kayalin, Lubomila, and they've got high quality offsets and they've been reducing their own emissions, they're going to look great. Everybody else, there's a big reputational risk around this, and corporates care dearly about reputational risk. So maybe that's one of the levers that we can be pulling.
100%. I think, when I was doing ESG diligence for, large transactions, regulatory risk, financial risk, operational risk, and reputational risk are those are the big ones. So absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that I was really excited about in terms of building carbon literacy amongst consumers. People can start to hold companies accountable once they understand what these terms mean, once they get familiar with seeing them, once they start to look into it deeper. And I do think that that's a journey on the consumer awareness front as well. And Maiko, to your question around disruption versus partnership, it 100% has to be both, but I think partnership is really where the power of scale comes in. Early stage companies and innovative companies are always disrupting, but that doesn't really result in large scale change until we can start to change the behavior of large corporates and incumbents. I think, take Beyond Meat, for example, in my industry and in kind of the consumer space. Beyond Meat disrupted their butt off, right? And it's awesome. But some of the biggest impact that they're going to have is through these partnerships with McDonald's and Yum Brands, where they start to replace the traditional drivers and large just volumes of meat consumption in the world. And so it's definitely a function of both, but I think partnership is where scale happens.
Well, Lubomila, I assume you're believing in partnerships a lot as well, but what's your view on that?
I actually have a bit of a different view on what is the driving force behind going beyond these pledges. And I think it's powerful as consumers are at this stage. What is really driving the agenda of a lot of, at least our clients, which are private equities, VCs, banks, and large corporates in the industrial space and tech, fast scaling companies, is actually legislation. We have a huge benefit of operating in Europe, UK, also in the US, but this is in Europe and in the UK is where the European Union and in the UK is where actually a lot of the shift is happening on a legislative level. And this is really putting essentially the ducks in a row for many of our clients, because it's asking them to set standard for the data that they collect, to set standard for the ESG level that they're looking to be achieving, and to set also an understanding amongst the portfolio that they have invested in. And I think it's kind of organizing at least the whole continent to start with, but it has trickle-down effects that are related to the Scope 3, because even if you're a company that is HQ'd in Germany, where I am based, for example, many of your suppliers are based in Asia and in the US, so eventually you will be looking to also influence the way they operate their business. Otherwise, you might kindly ask them to stop supplying you with certain products because you're looking for a certain standard. In terms of the importance of partnership, I have a totally a deep commitment to partnerships. As of course, this is why we built the Green Tech Alliance. I think that this space is about collaboration. It's not about competition. There's enough climate change to be fought all across the planet with all sorts of solutions. Sadly, we're so deep into the problem that we're not even going to be able to scratch the surface within the next 24 months. If we're looking at like some timelines that have been set for some first achievement. So with this in mind, we really need to be all head down into doing as much as possible, but also together. because if we only focus on our own solutions, we're never going to be able to really unpack the potential related to decarbonization, unpack the potential to fast-scaled impact that is related to getting companies on board with this agenda that for many is still not on top of their mind, because at the end of the day, it's for many not something that they have the luxury to be able to think of. This discussion itself, like our discussion here, is quite of a Western perspective on the challenge that is ahead of us. But if you look at the global South, this is a reality where climate change, not only that it exists, but it's something that is already kind of part of the reality of many on a day-to-day basis. But it's not something that is defining legislative agendas. It's something that is defining budgets which are related to the UN. So we really always need to be focused on what climate change is, what kind of problem we're looking to address, and how is the meta level different than the business level that we're talking about here.
Thank you so much. A quick reminder for everybody in the audience, we do have the opportunity to ask questions to the panel. And the way you do that is click on stage on the right side if you're not already there, and then onto Q&A, you see there's already a bunch of questions from the previous panels. But if you do have any question to any of the panelists now, feel free to submit them right now before we wrap up. We've had a co-creation session yesterday with a few founders at the end of the conference day. And what we do in those co-creation sessions, founders present what they're doing and they present one specific challenge that they have. And it's not a big surprise, obviously, that the challenges of founders, I mean, they're very diverse, but in the end, it kind of boils down to investment and selling, right? Obviously, and building the product. But one challenge that we talked a little bit about with one of the companies was in the early stages gaining traction. And I feel like all of you have some experience on how founders can approach gaining traction in the early stages. And one of the topics that came up was like, oh, can you have a B2B2C model where you kind of, rather than trying to sell one by one to individual users, use corporates to kind of have wider distribution. Has any of you some views or advice for early stage founders in terms of collaborating with corporates? Can you even do that if you're kind of on a really early pre-seed stage where maybe a lot of corporates would be skeptical even working with you? Or is there a certain strategy that you can use to kind of unlock the access to customers that a lot of corporates can provide? Any views on that from you?
I would love to share here some experiences that I've learned about from the Green Tech Alliance. And I think the immediate answer is pre-seed companies should focus on collaborating with corporates, maybe for letters of intent, where they validate the problem by talking to the corporate, but without necessarily trying to solve the problem for them. Because at the stage of pre-seed, you're still validating whether your existence is something that is justified, so to say. You don't necessarily have a business model, maybe pivoting every 2 hours, and there's just too many things that are moving blocks within your decision making. So if you've stumbled upon a problem that you feel like you want to solve, corporates are a good place, if your business is going to be B2B, to validate that this problem does exist and to maybe do it in a repeated manner. I would not focus the efforts of the company to build the product specifically according to the need of one corporate, because then you might end up tailoring it too much to a very specific use case. There's examples like Celonis, which of course are like one of the sweethearts of tech in Germany, who have actually a very interesting model where for the first few years of the company, they focused on working with 3 super large companies. I think one was Bayer, and then the other 2, I'm not sure, to solve a very particular data processing challenge for them. But of course, they had like 3 different clients so that they can triangulate if this was an actual problem, and then also find the overlaps and really milk this opportunity as much as possible. This is a good model, but it's one that was also approached by them post pre-seed, like they were already like spending their seed money on that. For pre-seed, I wouldn't focus efforts on really building like your whole capacity according to one use case if it's not validated by this being a challenge for many others as well.
We've seen an example recently of a company that is looking at the steel industry. So the steel industry obviously producing a lot of emissions, and this company they're super early stage. They're maybe even before pre-seed. The founder still works like a regular job, but he's managed to get 3 or 4 major steel manufacturers to supply him with data to run through his model to test whether his thing works. Now his mission is fully aligned with the mission of these steel companies who want to reduce their emissions, and so they're allowing him at a very low cost to test his hypothesis to see whether it works. And if it does work, then he's got 3 really big clients to roll this out to. So I think, if the goal of an early stage founder is to find a super low cost way of testing whether your thing works, whether your core hypotheses are correct or not, then yeah, partnering seems like a great way to do that.
Kayalin, anything to add to that?
No, I would just agree. I think when you're, pre-seed, when you're early stage, learning is most important. You don't want to get too far ahead of yourself in terms of investing in a solution that isn't actually going to meet the needs of your customer. And so, running pilots for free and testing out different hypotheses is also a great way to build relationship with brands and customers. If you're not, obviously it's a privilege to be able to do something for free and oftentimes requires some sort of money, but low cost perhaps then, but take the opportunity to learn first so that when you do end up like really turning on the gas, you're like very confident in your direction and aren't kind of wasting time, as we've talked about being a huge problem with climate tech overall. Learning though is huge.
Thank you. We got one question from the audience from Robin, who's talking about your perspective on exit opportunities in the climate tech space. So Robin is saying, obviously, isn't the number one rule of VC to return capital to the investors? I guess we can answer that as yes. I haven't seen a VC yet that doesn't want to return any capital. And the question at the end is, will big corporates try to buy their reputation back? So maybe at some point, if they can't change, will they be just acquiring loads of companies a few years down the line? What's your perspective on that? Feel free to chip in. Who wants to start? Pete, you want to start on that one?
Yeah, sure. Was it Bill Gates recently who said that the climate emergency is going to produce 7 more Teslas and 14 more, yada, yada. This is creating a lot of opportunity. So if you want to look at it like that, I personally don't like to look at it like that. I like to look at it as, let's create a lot of value in the world. If we create a lot of value in the world, then clearly we've got a right to a share in that. But if you are going to look at it like that, then, Tesla's a very good example, isn't it? Of a company who started off doing something very specific in the climate space, and now, they're one of the biggest companies in the world. But you've got to have this very long-term view, I think, and you've got to have this. You've got to have this view that the mission, first of all, is to solve a big problem. They say if you want to be a billionaire, then help 1 billion people. And I think it's that kind of attitude that we need going into this, rather than, I'm going to give you some money, can I have it back in 5 years, make it 3 times bigger.
And do you think, yeah, go ahead, Lubomila. Yeah.
I was just going to salute what he's saying, because I think it's really important to have this purpose-driven mindset when you're talking about what is this sector standing for, because if we perceive it in the same way that it's like business as usual, we're never going to be able to address the actual problems that we're setting ourselves to be able to address. I always keep on telling people that, for me, climate green tech is actually like med tech, in the sense that you're dealing with a very sensitive topic, and also with the future of humanity, but also even beyond that, the future of our planet. Our planet is going to be totally fine, but is it going to eliminate us or not is the question. So I think with this in mind, we also need to think, when we define the future of this sector, as one that is driven by achieving our goals. And as soon as we understand that achieving our goals is also what is going to bounce back our economy to a stable level, and is going to allow for a lot of these opportunities to go back into an equilibrium where we're really aligning ourselves to I would say, an equitable, but also impactful, but also profitable setup, this is the only way where we're going to see the future VC model. The exit opportunities are quite similar. The only thing is, like, are you looking for the same value element?
Got it, Kayalin. And maybe introducing a new perspective to that as well, or just doubling down on one specific point. Is there a need for the investment VC model to change fundamentally as well to for climate tech, right? Like the traditional VC model is you gotta have enough exits. We have a 10-year fund, and you need to deliver those returns. Now we've seen Sequoia announce like kind of a new model of basically not having to stick to those 10-year timelines. Is that something you already mentioned earlier? We should have something like this for climate tech. Is that something that we definitely need for climate tech, or will the old model even work at all, or we just definitely have to shift the VC model for climate tech to be successful in the long run?
I think it depends on the sector and the type of company. You know, like we group climate tech all together, but climate tech includes everything from, you know, software, carbon assessment companies like, you know, myself or Lubomila to, you know, really hard infrastructure plays, right? And like those are completely different investment sectors that are treated differently traditionally. Today, maybe they're both considered climate tech, but they have very different, you know, deployment models, very different growth models. And so I think that climate-focused investors, in the same way that any other investor, will just have to diversify as well in terms of the way that they think about the investments they're making. I think a really awesome example of this is Full Cycle, which is led by Brahim and Stephen. But you know, they invest in climate-related infrastructure plays, and they don't follow the traditional VC model because they know it doesn't work for their particular companies. And so I think it really just depends on the company. There are going to be ones that do fit traditional VC, and there are going to be ones that don't. And it's more sector specific, I would say, than it is related to climate tech.
Peet, what's your view on that? Are you following quite a usual structure for your fund as well? Do you feel like you're restricted to investing in a certain type of companies, or is there a need for a different approach as well? I
think there is a need for a different approach. In fact, the company who helped us, like with our strategy and our brand, said, "You're not really a VC, are you? You know, almost all of the things that VCs pride themselves in, like exits within 3 to 5 years, etc. You guys are not doing that." And we think that the core problem. So most startups fail. 90% of startups fail. 40% of those fail because, you know, there's no market for what they do. You know, others fail because they run out of money. All of these things can, you know, are challenges for startups. That if our mission here is not just to kind of spread money around and hope that some of it comes back, but to help fix the climate, then we should be helping these companies. And so that's something that we should be helping. Like, I personally have got the view that if we come across companies that are out of thesis for us, or they're in the wrong geography, then I still want to help them, which I think is not kind of a typical VC way of looking at things. I mean, people generally agree that there's lots about VC which is broken as it is before you try then to apply it to climate tech. So we're really trying to, I don't want to use the word subvert, but I suppose I have used it, venture capital, in order to solve this very specific problem.
Got it. Lubomila, any perspective on that?
No, just smiling because I think, you know, the activity tools people speak about, especially in the VC industry, like there's ways in which you can optimize your email so you save time and so on. And I'm listening to Peet, who is like, I still want to help them. I think it's a fantastic novel model to look at the topic, and I've also learned along my Planet journey that there's always a benefit to helping as many people as possible, and you don't know where the next deal is going to come from, the next opportunity for a hire or any kind of conversion that is important for you. I think what is going to change the VC model significantly is, I think, these ESG KPIs that we as a company support our clients to be able to embed into their decision-making process, be as part of the due diligence or as part of tracking companies down after they've been made part of the portfolio. And that is already being pushed by the LPs themselves. So there's not only a wish, but there's also a necessity for this kind of movement to happen. And I think if you look at it more from the pyramid of distribution of money, you understand where this comes from and how it's really going to embed itself across the whole industry. And that is also why there's also greenwashing laws that are coming up in Europe. There's also greenwashing laws coming up in the US. And these kinds of things are going to start defining a new paradigm in terms of how VCs think of themselves in terms of distribution of money. Kayalin rightfully said that it's about de-risking, about distribution of money according to a paradigm that also is defined not only by legislation, but where you could be spending your money in the most thoughtful manner. There's concerns about carbon bubble. All of these things matter, and this is also where VCs listen, because at the end of the day, they're not necessarily on top of the pyramid due to the sheer amount of money that they deal with. They're normally reliant on other bigger buckets and pockets in order to be able to make their own investments.
Thank you so much. This was such a good closing word, I think, for this session. And with that, I do want to wrap it up. I'd love to discuss much more with you, but yeah, as we see, there's still lots of challenges, but I think it's exciting to see so many ambitious people moving into the space, more money moving into the space, and people taking new approaches to partner with corporates. And I think we're just at the very beginning and also at a very critical phase right now. If you're thinking even how long it takes for a small startup to become really impactful and scalable, everything that's started right now this year will probably take the next decade to really scale if they're successful. So I'm excited for the next decade, and the urgency is real. It's really time if you're a founder to focus on it now. So thanks very much. Thanks, Lubomila. Thanks, Kayalin and Peet, for joining us. And I'll give everybody in the audience a quick overview of what's happening next. Already on the left side, you will see a little icon called networking that says now. That means the networking has just started, and this enables you to connect to other people as you would usually run into somebody in a real life conference. So we've replicated as much as possible here. And you basically get connected to a random person in the audience every 3 minutes. You can either just say hi quickly and move on to the next one. It's a bit of a speed dating approach, or you can also prolong the time and kind of have a bit more of a chat, maybe schedule a catch up afterwards if you'd like to do that. And other than that, do check the schedule in the reception area, because we're in so many different time zones. I'm not going to mention any specific times, but if you click on reception, you will see the time in your current time zone, which as a next step, we will have a co-creation session with 3 founders from across India, the US, and Germany, presenting their companies and sharing some challenges they have. And then again, this evening, we'll be back in the Climate Tech Club. Again, Kayalin has been really helpful with setting that up for us and inviting us along to host this session as part of the Climate Tech Club. So do join us in the Climate Tech Club on Clubhouse this evening as well, if you want to double down on some of these themes that we've been discussing today. Thanks everybody for joining, and really exciting to have you here, and see you next time.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.